without further ado, we can start the book talk for The Reckless Kind. And I'm dropping a link to purchase the signed copy in the chat right now.
Oh, awesome. Thank you. Awesome. Yes. And I do want to shout out Fire Becomes Her, which is coming out from Rosie, is like absolutely amazing. 1920s YA fantasy with fashion and aesthetics galore. Like, I love this book, of the most adorable characters that you totally root for. It's like, I'm so lucky I got to read an early copy because your book is fantastic.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, well, it's out in February, so.
Oh yeah,
soon. But yeah, we're going to talk about The Reckless Kind, though. So I just want to talk a little bit about the origins of this book, because when I first met you in 2016, around this time, because we met in the fall, we were both writing queer young adult books, and I got to read a very early version of this book. And I've gotten to witness the absolute joy of this book becoming what it is, and seeing it go from the draft that I read.
Messy.
I mean, what was that, 5 years ago?
Yeah.
Is that absolutely wild? So watching it go from that book, which you say messy, but I remember reading it and I was just completely bowled over immediately. I was like, this author is incredible. I can't believe they want to be my friend. Like, it was really cool. And, it's so cool to see that happen, and see it go from that draft that I read back then to seeing it go to, this book with this beautiful cover and pages and everything. And it's out today, and that's incredible. And I'm just wondering if you can tell us a little bit about, what this journey has been like over the last 5 years, or even from before then, since you had to write the book before we met.
Yeah.
What has the publication process been like for you?
Yeah, it's been a really long journey. Like, as you guys know, I have a YouTube channel as well. And in my channel, I interview lots of authors, and the standard length of time it usually takes from I'm going to be a published author to actually becoming a published author is usually about 10 years for everyone, it seems like. And so, even before 2016, I'd been working on it. And the idea is probably I could trace it all the way back to middle school and high school, probably even in middle school or high school when I broke my arm. That was probably even a starting point for it. But I really kind of got the juices flowing on it probably earnestly in 2013 when I read Christian Lavransdatter, which is Sigrid Undset's the book that made Sigrid Undset the Pulitzer Prize winning novelist. And it's a really amazingly deep, vivid book set in medieval Norway. And the characters are really rich and passionate, and the setting is super detailed and super evocative, but the theme is kind of awful. The theme is very anti-feminist, and the theme, to me, as I was reading it, felt like if you defy your parents, you're going to suffer for it. So yeah, I know. I'm like, this kind of is.
This book is very much the antithesis of that.
Yeah, right. And so I kind of was feeling all that vibe, and I was really feeling the Scandinavian vibe for a long time. I wanting to do something set in Scandinavia because I just love the ponies growing up. That's my favorite breed of pony, was the little Norwegian fjord horses. And so Kristin Lavransdatter kind of spurred some ideas in me, and I started kind of writing in earnest in 2013. And then I had a finished draft in 2014, and it was a mess, as your first draft ever of a novel is. I had 80,000 words, but it was not in the correct order.
I know what that's like.
Yeah, right. So I really even did a whole rewrite from scratch. Really, I had to tell myself the story, and then I had to tell the story in a way for other people to understand what I was trying to do. And then you and I were getting ready for Pitch Wars in 2016, and we met, and we also met with the whole like Pitch Wars hopeful group on Facebook. And I remember, I don't know how I had the energy, but I feel like during, I know, like during 2016, like we were reading so many manuscripts from other people and like also revising our own manuscripts at the same time based on other people's feedback. Like, I just feel like I was reading so much and getting feedback from so many different people and like revising. I was just like constantly writing during that whole period. And so you got into Pitch Wars, I didn't.
That's right. But then you got an agent and I didn't. So.
Yeah. And then I got an agent, but then I went on sub that first time and I didn't get my book sold to a publisher, and my agent left the industry. Totally okay, happens. And we are good friends to this day. So it's awesome. But then I got a new agent and went on sub with, oh, and by the way, it's for people who might not know, going on sub is when your agent sends your manuscript out to publishers and then you get a lot of rejections. And then finally one publisher says, I want this.
It's so funny because going on sub is like the thing that we're all aiming for, but it's the worst part of publishing. It's like usually the most nerve-wracking part of being in publishing is being on sub. So we're all aiming for this goal, and then we get there and we're like, take us back.
Yeah, it's like, wow, either all this work I've spent years doing is going to pay off in an amazingly big way, or it's going to all be for nothing. Of course, the learning and growing, we have perfected our art and we have learned to become better writers. So even if our book doesn't sell while it's on sub, we've learned a lot and we can apply that to the next one. I mean, that's the logic there. But every time you get a rejection, it feels like a stab in your heart. It feels like, oh my God, I'm a failure. You know,
but you got there. You got the yes, which is, it's the one yes that you need, and you got it.
Yeah, my dream came true when Daniel Ehrenhaft at Soho Teen, who I was like shocked because he's such a legend, offered on my book. And then I began my journey with Soho Teen, which I got my offer in 2019 and then spent the next 2 years, as one does in the publishing process, doing developmental edits and copy edits and past pages, and also a lot of waiting in between those periods. And then now, ta-da, today it hits the shelves.
And it's pretty.
It hits your earbuds too, because last night I got to listen to my audiobook for the first time, thanks to Rosie, who told me that it was 9 o'clock here, but it was midnight on the East Coast. Yeah. And I could download it from libro.fm. And so that's what I did.
Yeah. And just a plug for Libro FM. I'm not sure if Chevalier has partnered with them. They are. Okay, great. Libro.fm is an incredible alternative to Audible. So if you're looking to cut Amazon out of your life, Libro FM is my favorite place to go. You can get your audiobook credits to support your local bookstore, which is just fantastic. So definitely check that out if you're an audiobook listener. You've mentioned throughout this process, you know, you are working with multiple agents, you're working with this editor who's an absolute legend in the business. But I know that you've worked with a lot of other really amazing people in the industry too. You worked with some incredible freelance editors. You worked with some like really cool critique partners, like I don't know their names, but you worked with some really cool people. And I just want to know, you know, as you've been going through this process of revising this book, what has been the biggest or just the most impactful light bulb moment for you in the editorial process of talking to editors and all the advice that they're giving you? What has been either the best edit or the biggest, coolest light bulb moment that you've had as part of that process?
Yeah, there's been, I can already think of like 10 things that I've heard from people and that like helped to make it like so much better. One was simply like the characters in like a really early draft, the characters were reading to this one agent as very adult-like. And I realized that that's because they're doing adult-like things. They are living on their own. They're kind of, they're figuring out a way to make a living for themselves. And so what I did then is I went back through the book and I kind of hung a lantern and had the characters acknowledge, hey, we're like becoming adults right now. And I forget the exact line, but I put lines in there of that, and I really liked how those moments kind of fleshed out, and how it acknowledged that, true, there are kids who are teenagers, and I'm sure like I can totally relate to this, where I felt like much older even than adults. Like I felt like I kind of had it figured out a little bit better than people who are probably double my age. And there's many teenagers who feel that way as well. And so hanging a lantern on that, I thought was, and that brought some really great lines. And also, I know you said one, but I'm going to give one other, because I have to give a shout out to Alexa Waco, who was my editor, who took over after Dan left. And Alexa gave like the best editorial feedback. Oh my gosh, her feedback was just amazing. She worked so hard. She put like so many notes on the manuscript. It was amazing. But one note was, during a sex scene, she just asked, what about condoms? And I was like, that is super, super important in a teen YA novel. And I had originally written that scene, just not acknowledging that. I rewrote that whole scene for like the purpose of acknowledging contraception and safe sex, and turned out so much better than what I originally had. And
Alexa, that's a great edit.
That's a great edit. Yeah.
Well, I'm super curious about what the research process was like for that. Did you already know exactly what you needed to include in that scene, or did you have to go do a bunch of research? Obviously, the book is historical.
Yeah.
Just you probably had to do a lot of research overall. What was the research process like?
Yeah. So I mean, weird thing about me, you're probably this way too. Like, I can tell you just like to randomly research things. Like, even if it's not for a book, you're just like, I'm just curious about something. I'm going to go on the internet for hours and hours and just learn about this particular thing. And so some random things that like I love to learn about are medical history and contraceptive history, and like, you know, just queer history in general. I mean, there's the history of farriery, like the history of veterinary medicine, like all of that. Love it. So I had been just researching that for many, many years. And Google Books is really great, because you can go on googlebooks.com. You can search by time period, like 1800 to 1895 or whatever. And then you can search for things like contraception, and also whatever medical terms that you want to look for, and you can figure out what people were saying about that sort of thing during that time period. And so I found a lot of information about that. And I found, and I also kind of in my head imagined a world where Sigrid, who's a very kind of progressive mother figure in the book, she would make sure that everyone is practicing safe sex, even if she has to kind of keep it on the down low. So I envisioned her connecting with the other people who were concerned about that sort of thing in the village, and having maybe a little underground network from the city.
I love that you have created, I mean, what you have is a historical novel that's set in a kind of imaginary country. And so you have the freedom to, you know, create cultural norms or, you know, social circles that aren't necessarily documented that way, although they could very plausibly be true. Those types of mother figures could totally exist. But you have that freedom to just kind of imagine what you want. And that's such a, I think, an interesting freedom to take to a queer book like this, where, you know, you get to imagine this world for them that's not that far off from what actually exists in history. I should say that, like, when I started this book, like way back when, I did get to a mental freezy, like brain block place where I was like, I'm setting this in Norway. I have to get every single detail about Norway exactly right. And then I got to points where I will never know, because I personally have never been to Norway. So I will never be able to get everything about the culture right, because I'm not from there.
And then I just had a mental revelation that it doesn't actually have to be set in Norway. It can be my own country. It could be my own village, and I can create my own world. And then like the forward movement of the writing happened. And it turned out to be, it gives me so much leeway as far as making up customs, like the gold horse and the braided hair, wedding rings, and those sorts of things. Which is
I love those details because they feel so real, even if they're, part of a fictional culture. But they felt so, they grounded the culture so well and made it feel like a real place. And I mean, it essentially almost is a real place, but yeah, you have that freedom to create something that's a little bit different and create something that's unique to your characters and their world.
And they are all like little based in things, but they are, so I'm not just like pulling out random things from nowhere. They're based in things, but they are their own custom according to that village.
Yeah, and something that I really admire about this book is that as far as history goes, there's this misconception that queer people didn't exist in history, which we know is not true. It's just that they either were not documented or that those documents have been destroyed or removed from historical catalogs because of more modern sensibilities. We know that queer people existed. We know that they were thriving. And we know that that's something that should exist in books. And so something that I really admire about this book is it doesn't shy away from that. It really doesn't pretend that queer people were an anomaly. It's very much, these characters exist and they're real. They're not just the only three queer people in the country. They are existing in a world where that exists as a subculture. And I really, really loved that. And so, I'm wondering, what was it like for you to be writing these fully fledged queer characters who are so often erased from history? What did you want to create with this book with that in mind?
Yeah, well, first I went in and did the research, and I read from queer voices all the, back in like the mid 1800s, the late 1800s, there were people who were writing about queerness and about gender and questioning marriage all the way in Western culture in the 19th century. And it got me thinking, and I hope this sort of thing gets other people thinking, like queer people have always been here. Why don't we see it as often in our Western literature? And really, that's the key. It's Western literature because, prior to Western colonialism and imperialism, like there were cultures all over the globe that celebrated and acknowledged diverse genders and diverse marriage practices. And the idea of a gender binary has only come as a result of Western imperialism and a certain religion, like basically wiping away and erasing the nuances of humanity. And so I hope now that we are in a place where now we can share information, we can kind of uncover these voices and also hopefully rewrite the true history, which is that gender diversity and sexual diversity has always existed throughout history. And it's an important part of the human experience that shouldn't be treated as a taboo, but should be something that we say and words that we use all the way from, yes, when you're a little kid and you're first questioning, who am I as a person? That small child should have a number of options to choose from as far as how they want to define themselves. And hey, and you're allowed to change your definitions as you grow up as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this book absolutely succeeds at creating a space for those types of characters. We have these three incredible characters who are all different in how they interact with queerness. Which is something that I also really appreciate about the book, that they each interact with their own queerness in a very different way, as well as the way that they form relationships. And something that is very personal to me, obviously, is that there's a queer platonic relationship in this book. We have this really close bond that's formed here. And I want to, know what your process was with coming to that as what you wanted to write about. What was that like for you, just to create that space for that type of relationship?
Yeah, I think the process of writing that was a real process of me uncovering things about myself and my history of understanding human relationships from all the way probably back to high school, and even a little bit further probably. I remember, now, were you ever in high school in a human psychology class or a human sociology class?
I wasn't. I didn't have one in high school.
So I remember there was this thing that was taught in our human psychology class in high school, where it was about, and I'm probably messing it up. So if there's someone who's an actual psychologist, they're going to be like, you are explaining that wrong. But this is basically the thesis statement that my teacher, who was a sweet person, I'm sure she did not mean to do any harm. She was a really nice person, but she said that she was teaching human development. And the idea of human social development was that when you are kids, there were a number of stages. And when you are kids, like elementary, middle school age kids, kids group themselves, this is by nature, in groups of girls and groups of boys, and they're separate. And then, according to this theory of human development, as kids get into teenage years, they group themselves into mixed gender large social groups. And then as they get into their 20s, by human nature, they pair up into opposite sex pairs. And then their social groups are about, heterosexual pairs who then build their social group around the rearing of children. And I wasn't aware of things very much back then in high school. But I remember feeling extremely uncomfortable with the idea that it was human nature to pair up at a certain age and then marry and raise children. And I thought that was horrifying and extremely boring. And then I also remember being miffed by the idea that children in elementary schools would naturally group into groups of gender.
When that's completely not true at all.
Yeah.
That those gendered groups are very much a social construct.
Socially constructed.
We don't even start sorting ourselves like that until society starts sorting us like that. And all of a sudden we have, I have to know which bathroom to use or which changing room to use. The girls are doing this activity, the boys are doing this activity. Girls are supposed to wear pink and boys are supposed to wear blue, kind of stuff. Right. We don't even, that kind of stuff doesn't occur to us until society tells us that that's the norm.
Exactly.
So how can it be human nature when it's a construct?
Yeah. And this was presented to me in a high school psychology class as this is the way humans are. And I did not at the time have the vocabulary or the awareness of queer theory and stuff to verbally challenge that or question it. But I just remember feeling extremely uncomfortable and having this sense of that's not right. And that's also horrifying. But something that comes to mind now reflecting back on that is the idea that things that are common are treated as normal, and that and thought of as just because this type of behavior is common, it must be basic human nature. And that's how a lot of kind of social scientists in the 19th century and 20th century thought of things, right? So those are kind of the ideas that were, I guess you could say, in the pool of my brain as I'm writing this. And you can kind of see my pinging at it? Am I poking at it from different angles in the friendship that Gunnar and Asta form early on, like in their childhood, a very like tight bond. And then the idea that it's not a romantic relationship, which is something that I had to figure out how to write, because I got so much feedback early on in the writing process of people thinking, oh, Gunnar and Asta are in love. And I knew, no, that's not what I'm writing. I'm writing so having to figure out like how to present it in a way that the average reader with their lens is going to understand that what I'm presenting here is a platonic love. And
it's so hard it's so difficult to do that when you're coming from a place of yourself understanding what that looks like and understanding what that feels like and loving that type of relationship. And then to try to translate that over to someone who's going to come in with a bunch of expectations. It's so difficult. I've had to deal with it myself because in Fire Becomes Her, I also have a queer platonic partnership as like the central relationship in the story. And so many people don't understand that that's what that is. Like I literally just today got a professional review that called it a central romance that was asexual. And that's not what that is. It's not a romance. It's a central relationship, but it's not a romance. And that's the whole point. And so people don't have the vocabulary or just not even just the words, but I want to say like the emotional breadth to understand what that is unless we talk about it. And that's why I think this book is so important, because there are going to be so many people out there like you and me who really needed to understand what that type of relationship looked like and see that modeled for us, who are then going to pick up this book and see it and get to explore this whole other world of relationships and the types of relationships that can exist between different characters and different people in the world. And it's, you know, it's not necessarily something that I would have known what it was if I'd encountered it in a book. You know, it would have been brand new to me if I'd encountered it in a book as a teenager. And I think that's really powerful because there are so many people who don't know what it is and kind of stumble their way into it as adults. But being able to find that and find the safety in that, I think is just really powerful. And the relationship that you're, you know, modeling on the page here between Asta and Gunnar is so, so beautiful and just so nuanced and complex. And at the same time, so easy. And I think that that's really powerful and a very, very cool thing to have in a book. I haven't seen a queer platonic relationship like this before. In fiction, I've only seen a few. And that's just something that I think is so neat and so different about your book and the way that you're portraying these different queer characters and their relationships to each other.
Yeah. And I want to add that for anyone who's watching who might also be grappling with how to show different kinds of relationships that are not necessarily romantic, but are meaningful, it's hard because your audience will read into it with their own lens and their own, like, basically social paradigm that has been inflicted on them. So you have to like then go through this phase of like unpacking and dismantling their expectations and then retraining their brain to be like, and you have to do all that as you're writing a fictional story. Like it's one thing to do it as a college dissertation, right? But like to actually do it in fiction and then to have it make sense to a wide variety of people who it's really hard. So getting feedback from a lot of different people. And then when people put in their comments like, oh, so she's in love with him. At that moment, that's a point where you have to add a little something from the character that makes it clear the nuance of the relationship.
I always think it's so interesting when I get comments like that, because the answer, to, oh, is she in love with him, is always, well, yes, but also no. Because it's a different kind of love. And it's just as important and just as powerful, but it's different and it's not what they're expecting. And so there's definitely a lot of expectation about romantic relationships because of, shipping and like the culture of fandom. And I think that's a really powerful place to come from, is the culture of fandom becoming mainstream is super cool. And the ability to come into these stories and, you know, kind of ship with abandon is really fun.
Yeah.
But it does occasionally get a little bit like, oh, wait, right. But then there are characters who are actually canonically not shipping. We're not going to ship those together because that's not who they are. And so it's always interesting to me to see like kind of the impact of that on fiction.
And you had that experience in fandom with the Hunger Games and Katniss. And I kind of had a similar experience actually with the X-Files and Scully and Mulder. I remember like worshipping Scully so much. And when people would Scully and Mulder ship, I would be like, no. And so
the wonderful thing about shipping is that nobody's right.
Yes. No one's right. Yeah.
You know, no, there's no definitive answer. I can go online and I could write a dissertation. I could. Somebody hire me. Let me write it. I could write like a whole document about, you know, the ways in which Katniss Everdeen is exhibiting asexual and aromantic identity and through a queer lens. But at the end of the day, it's not on the page. It's not written in stone, and other people can disagree with me. And that's such a cool place to be in with fans.
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
And, you know, we put these books out in the world, and, you know, you and I are both writing these queer platonic partnerships, but at the end of the day, we put that book out into the world and the readers get to read it, and they get to, you know, put their own feelings on those characters, and they get to interact with those characters in a way that's going to build them up and be whatever they need them to be. And I think that's something that's really cool.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely allow, feel free as readers to and take your own interpretations. I did my best putting my thing on it, but once it's out in the world, it is yours. And once you read it, is yours, and you can make it and interpret it the way that you want to. And it's valid. That's the wonderful thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
I was just actually thinking we're more than halfway through, and I did want to offer my little giveaway. So is there any way Cyan could tell us how many are in the chat or who are joining us today at the moment? 9. Oh, you are muted. You're muted.
Yes, we have 9 people right now.
Oh, 9?
Yes.
So if anyone's viewing, pick a number between 1 and 9, and I'll run a random number generator. And whoever wins is going to get a horse plushie from Elio Lil Art, which they're amazing artists who make these amazing horse plushies. And you're also going to get a signed hardcover of the book.
Yay. So if you want to run the number generator, I was going to say they're in alphabetical order, and it could just be that, or if they're commenting in the chat, that works too.
I am. Okay, I have generated a number. Has everyone in the chat like posted a number?
We have 1 number in the chat so far. Everybody else needs to put a number. Oh, we got another number. You see the chat?
I can't. I need to click on a window. There we go.
Got it. Like whoever's the first person to say it, like.
Okay, you guys keep picking numbers because none of you are right.
We got 2 7s.
3 7.
Yes, Laura. Oh my gosh.
Laura got it.
Laura got it. I have Laura's address already. So Laura, you're gonna get a horse plushie.
Woo. Yay.
Okay.
Great. Well, I only have one more question for you before we turn it over to the audience, and I'm going to need a little prop here.
Oh.
Jane here would like to know, since you have so many creatures, what she has a question for your creatures, and it's, how do you get your human to pay attention to you when they're writing all the time?
Oh, let me get someone to answer. So this is Simone. And her brother Jackson is on the floor, but he's always camera shy. Simone says the best way to get attention when no one is paying attention to you is to pee on the floor. And this really good advice works across all species. If you pee on the floor, people will pay attention to you. There you go.
Well, that's some good advice, I guess. Jane has been hunkered down.
Oh, who do we have there?
This is Bisbee.
Oh, Bisbee.
He's exhausted.
Oh, I wish my cat Beans was here, but I think he's outside causing trouble. He's orange, kind of like yours.
Yeah.
Yay.
Yeah. Well, do we have any questions from the audience?
Yeah, so everybody, you can put your questions in either the chat or the Q&A. I feel like the question that I had while people type theirs, it was kind of already answered. But maybe if there was like something about it that you didn't cover already. So I am actually a librarian by trade. So I'm very, very interested in the research aspect. And I know that you mentioned Google Books, but I was wondering like what was kind of like the coolest document that you found or something while you were doing your research for it.
So I discovered a few years ago Edward Carpenter, who is really, really awesome. He was born in 1844, and he was an early gay rights activist, vegetarian, animal rights activist, anti-vivisectionist, socialist. And he would write these pamphlets on everything. I mean, also like paganism, and he's very like anti-civilization, but there are a couple pamphlets I really liked. One was Homogenic Love, Its Place in a Free Society. And it's basically acknowledging that they of course this was written in like the 1890s or the early 1900s. So like they used words that were completely different. But he talked about basically like same-sex love exists, and not only does it exist, but it's actually good for society and makes society better and has a place in society. He also wrote another book called Some Transitional Types of People, which is basically like all about trans identities. And this was like written again in like the 1890s. And it's like very, of course, it wasn't like widely published. It was published as pamphlets that were kind of like hand distributed to people. So just really interesting to get that perspective and to have it really be like, instead of a perspective that's like scientific and judgmental and like, how can we fix them? Which there's a lot of that, but it's like, this is actually good and this makes society better. And then there was another one called, I think it was just like Sex, Love, and Its Place in a Free Society. It's very like free love type of ideology. And yeah, just super, super interesting to get that perspective and those words back in the day. Also, Imri, which is, I don't have the exact date. I think it was written in 1902, but it was one of the very first gay romances with a happy ending. And it's great to get that perspective written at that time period. That's very like positive. And it's called Imre, M-I-M-R-E. And the writer is Xavier Maine. That was a pseudonym. And it's amazing because when you read it, like these people back in the day, they're exactly like us. And I think I told you this on the Back in the Gay panel, Rosie, but the very opening scene is they meet cute over iced coffee, which
the gayest thing that's ever happened.
Yes, iced coffee is like, has been for over 100 years the official gay beverage
of the queers. Yes. We've got a couple questions in the Q&A. So if you want to answer, will there be a sequel?
I have a sequel. Oh, I can open up the Q&A window.
I've got you answering this one live. I've been doing it for you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, please feel free to like shout these because I'm having trouble seeing them.
It's okay, I got you. Yeah, so is there going to be a sequel?
Oh, okay. So I think this has to like do really well in order for them to be a sequel, but there is a sequel in my head and I have like ideas, and I have been living with Erland and Gunnar and Asta for, the last year or so imagining their life after this book, and they had a life after the book, and scenes are in my head, and I would love to write it, but this has to do really well. So buy this and tell your friends. And then but I have a sequel idea that would be Gunnar and Fred point of view, dual point of view. So it would be like a brother story.
Going to ask if you can give us like one little tidbit from the imagined sequel that you
have. Like imagined sequel is Gunnar and Erland kind of living this ideal life in Oak Island, which was a town that was briefly mentioned in The Reckless Kind, and it's a very bohemian part of Hesteland, and it's very like artistic, and so Erland's finding his people there, but Gunnar kind of wants to go back to Muskox Hollow, and there's a fire in Muskox Hollow, and they have to go back to help the citizens, and then it's this tension between, do I stay here and help my brother, or do we continue to live the ideal life in Oak Island? And that sort of tension in their relationship. But, you know, understanding that Erland and Gunnar are like definite soulmates. And so they're going to have tension, but they are going to work it out.
I love that. I think that's great. So we've got one more question here that I think is a great one. Did you receive any pushback in writing the disabled characters' disability aspects of the book? And if so, what did you do with the earlier drafts?
Yeah, so there's... God, it's so hard because there's such a taboo in our society about acknowledging disability and acknowledging that people have disability. Like for me, like every single person I know, like I cannot think of someone who is not disabled, like in my circle of friends who I know. And like I have multiple disabilities. So there's this thing of people almost feel like it's unrealistic to have so many disabled characters. And then they feel like something's wrong here because there's so many disabled characters. And it's really hard to get people to like look at life like disability is a normal part of life and most people have it, but we imagine that it's not there because of capitalism that wants to project the world that everyone is able to work and contribute to the capitalist system. So just getting people to acknowledge that and to not feel like it's a taboo sort of thing. Then there's also like little comments like, why is Asta hearing impaired, because that doesn't really contribute to the story at all or the plot. And so the idea that someone's disability has to contribute to the plot in a way, is extremely kind of frustrating. And so, there's just a whole lot of that along the way, but you just gotta, I think that also fueled a lot of what was in the author's note at the beginning, to kind of address that lens that people might be viewing it with and hopefully have them open their minds a little bit before they dive into the book.
Good answer. Yeah, I totally agree. There's that pushback of like, if it's not related to the plot, then why is it there? And I don't fully understand that because so many of the things that happen to us in our lives are not related to the plot, so to speak. You know, it's there's so many things that exist in our lives that are important to who we are that aren't necessarily drivers in our ambition or in our goals and what we're setting out to achieve. So I think that's kind of a silly pushback, but it happens so often. So yeah, I absolutely agree. Do you have any more questions from the audience here? Because if not, I will ask you more, but I don't want to monopolize your time for myself.
This is a good time though. If you like The Reckless Kind, definitely there's some books that you should check out, like The City Beautiful by Aidan Polydoros, which is also a queer historical book that just came out and is really good. Rosie's Fire Becomes Her, which comes out in February, which is 1920s and really awesome. Rosie's Tarnished Are the Stars, which is a sci-fi queer book that has historical vibes because it's like Victorian steampunky vibes, right? Not historical, but The Girls Are Never Gone by Sarah Glenn Marsh is amazing.
Excellent. Sarah Glenn Marsh is excellent.
Yes, she's the nicest person too, and a really good author. And Cool for the Summer by Dahlia Adler. And Some Girls Do by Jen Dugan. Hot Dog Girl by Jen Dugan. We're getting into the contemporaries, but I'm just shouting them out because they're awesome. And A Curse of Roses by Diana Pinguicha, which is set in the 1200s in Portugal. It's a lesbian love story with magic and Portuguese culture, and it's wonderful. Oh, and then I saw her in the chat, Ariel Henry, who we're like twins. We are twins. We are both twins, but we're not twins with each other. But both of us are twins. And Ariel wrote a lovely book about facial differences and disability, and this is phenomenal. And then Parting the Veil by Paulette Kennedy, a historical bisexual main character.
That's great. That's such a good
That's my list.
That was one of my questions was, can you recommend some books for people who like the reckless kind? But you nailed it. Yeah. I am wondering a little bit about, how your writing process is going at this point. You mentioned that you have an idea for a sequel, but do you have any other things you're working on, or how has your process developed now that you have a book out?
Yeah. Oh, I'm revising my YA fantasy. That is you've read early drafts, which is set on a Scandinavian island that deals with a family that's cursed. At some point in their lives, each member of the family will transform into animals, and I think it would be great for fans of The Reckless Kind. It's a little bit more magical, a little bit more kind of a Howl's Moving Castle is kind of.
That's a great comp for it. Yeah, I totally agree. It's very much in the same vein as The Reckless Kind in the way that it is, historical and literary, but it does have that little introduction of magic into it that feels very, very Diana Wynne Jones to me.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
That's my next one. Yeah.
Yay. All right. Well, if we have any more questions from the audience, we can go ahead and answer those. Otherwise, I'll turn it back over to Saya.
Yeah, I think we've done most of our cues. I've also shared the link for so many, like as you were saying the recommendations, I was just trying to I could toss them in there as fast as I could. I was like, but if anybody wants to go back through the chat, I've linked I think about half of them from your recommended stack, but then also the pre-order for Fire Becomes Her, and also our special signed link for The Reckless Kind. If you aren't able to get to the link, we're also going to have the stock in store. So if anybody wants to stop by Chevalier's and pick up one of our signed copies, I'm pretty sure we still have one in the window, and you can take it out the window if you want. But yeah, thank y'all so much for coming out. This has been fantastic. And I think that's, if there's no more questions, I think that's about it.
Thank you so much for hosting, Cyan, and thanks for your awesome questions, Rosie.
Yeah. So we have a congrats from Elizabeth. Congrats from Ariel.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, Ariel. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Rosiee, thank you. Oh, so many familiar names. Awesome. AP is here. Oh, wow. Randolph. And awesome. I think I saw my mom hear it too. Thank you guys so much for coming.
Thank y'all. Have a good night, everybody. Thanks so much.